So here's the APA quick guide. There's two ways to cite in a sentence. A parenthetical citation, where you put the author and year in parentheses at the end of the sentence. For example, fast food can increase the risk of obesity and heart disease. Johnson and Lee 21. And then you can have a narrative citation, where you use the author's name in the sentence and put the year in parentheses. For example, Johnson and Lee 2021 found that fast food can increase the risk of obesity and heart disease. For this, you always include the author in the year. Always give the author's last name in the publication year. If there's no date, you use parentheses and just put ND in the parentheses. For example, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, ND. This is really important because we need to be citing our sources in almost every paragraph, right? Essentially, if you've used something, if you've read an article, if you're going to cite especially if you're going to use a quote, you need to have a citation. And I think some people are just scared of this because they think it's really difficult. But again, a lot of the times you literally just need the author's last name and the publication year for APA formatting. And that's really not that bad, right? So I've been suggesting to my live students to, what I do when I write a paper is typically I put that information, even if I don't cite it perfectly right then, I put the parentheses at the end of my sentence, and then I'll put in just the HTML or the www there in the parentheses after where I know I'm going to have to put a citation. That way I won't forget later, right? And not only that, but I can be like, oh, here's the information I'm talking about, okay? Like this is the article I'm citing, and all I got to do later is go figure out, like once I make my reference page, which I typically do towards the end, I can just take that last name and put that reference right where I know it needs to go. So that just is like, almost think of it kind of like as a placeholder. And I just think it's easier that way to remember, so you're not forgetting to put these in. And for this classes specifically, or this is English 100, like I'm trying to be like really flexible about this, but like the further you go in education and like the harder classes you go into, this is just going to be like, this is of the utmost importance to do this kind of stuff, right? Formatting, citations especially, very, very important. So quoting a source, so you add the page number or paragraph when quoting directly. Fast food is often high in sodium and sugar. Johnson and Lee 2021, page 22. So if you use a website though, typically you can just find the paragraph number and write that paragraph number down. I know that's oftentimes a big problem. And we'll get there. I won't skip yet. Numbers of authors. So numbers of authors, if you have one author, it's just Smith 2020. Two authors, it would be Smith and Jones 2021. Three or more authors, you do Smith et al. 2022. Group or organization as an author. If the author is an organization, write it out first time. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC 2022. Later you can shorten it. CDC 2022. If you have multiple sources in one citation. If more than one source supports the same idea, separate them with semicolons. So if you have several studies all at once, you're talking about multiple things, you can have Johnson and Lee 21, Smith 2020, and CDC 2022. No author. This is the one I wanted to skip to when I stopped myself from doing. So use the title or the first few words of the title of the work in quotation marks. For example, you could have fast food and health. If of all of these things I'm talking about today, I think the no author thing is the most important because this has happened to me at least a baker's dozen times in my life where I've looked up a source and I can't actually find the author who wrote it. This happens a lot of times when you're like looking at an organization or you're just like on a web page, right? And you're reading something and you realize there's no author for this. That I think that you'll find that happens quite often. So all you have to do is use the title of the sentence. Again, the title of the article and the date. So just keep that in mind, right? If you can't find the author, don't worry. You can just use the title like that. Like I can't count them. I've been saying this in my live classes too. Happens to me all the time. Like you can go, and I was helping a student the other day in class write a paper, and we couldn't find the author, and I was like, that's what happens, right? The date not being there too is another really common thing. So you don't find the date, you just write ND It's pretty easy. So yeah, again, I can't emphasize enough. Just put those parentheses there at the end and put just a place filler. And it's probably the easiest thing that you can do to like just remind yourself like, oh, I need to go back when I'm doing my revisions. Like that would be one of the last things I do when I'm doing a paper, right? Because you don't want to like wreck your flow to like go put in the works cited, right? Like you just be like, oh, now I've got to put this in here. And instead you just like put in like, oh, I've got to put a citation here and just keep writing, right? Because they're kind of like two different things to like be writing and then do like the technical part of writing. I find are like two different things that you're trying to accomplish, right? Like you're trying to like, the creative part of writing is difficult and you don't want to get off of that to like do all the technical aspects that you have to do for the paper later on, right? So the consistency rule, every in-text citation must match a reference entry, and every entry on the reference page must appear in your essay. So for example, APA style, fast food has become a major part of modern life, but it also contributes to serious health problems. Many people choose fast food because it's cheap and convenient, yet regular consumption can lead to obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. Parentheses, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC 2022. Studies have shown that meals from fast food restaurants often contain high levels of sodium, fat, and added sugars. Johnson and Lee 2021. In addition, advertisements for these foods often target young people, creating lifelong eating habits that are hard to break. Smith 2020. While fast food can be enjoyed occasionally, understanding its health risk is important for making better choices about diet and lifestyle. Your reference page. Then you need a reference page, which would be its own page at the end of your paper. Below is an example of what that page would look like, as well as the specific rules necessary for APA. So for references, you just, again, you have to have references, the top of your paper, left aligned, and then down below, you just have it left aligned as well. You just Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 2022, fast food and your health, and then the website. Johnson, P. and Lee R. 2021, Nutrition in the Modern Diet, Healthline Publications. Smith, J. 2020, Marketing to Minors, The Fast Food Industry's Influence, Academic Press. APA Formatting Notes for Students. Make sure your title is centered and bolded, references, no underlines, italics, or quotation marks, spacing. The entire page is double spaced, which your whole paper should be, right? So no extra spaces between entries. Hanging indent. Each reference uses a 1/2 inch hanging indent. The first line starts at the margin and all following lines are indented. Alphabetical order. Entries are listed by the first author's last name or organization name if no author. Italics. Books and web pages titles are italicized. And then URLs. Use live hyperlinks, blue and underlined, only if your instructor allows them. Otherwise, plain text is fine. I'm fine with hyperlinks. I find that's one of those things that I never plan for. If you just like copy and paste your www and paste it into your paper, if it stays blue when you turn that paper in, that's not a big deal to me either way. That like you can just click on that. I like it because sometimes if I am interested or if I want to check out the source, I can just now click on your paper and it will send me right to your source. These were not things, when I took this class again, 12 years ago now, I passed all my papers in hard copy. That was like the requirement then, so things have changed drastically since then. Now we're going to talk about integrating quotations smoothly. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to use signal phrases to introduce quotations effectively. Blend quotations grammatically and stylistically into their own sentence. Avoid dropped quotes, quotes that appear without context. And edit and punctuate quotations correctly using ellipses and brackets. Why integrating quotes matters. When you quote, you're letting someone else's voice join your writing, but you're still the host. A quote should never feel like it crashed the party. Instead, it should flow naturally, sounding like part of your own paragraph. Think of quotes as ingredients in a recipe. The quote might have great flavor, but you're the chef who decides how much to add and when to mix it in. A dropped quote. Education is the most powerful weapon. An integrated quote. As Nelson Mandela famously noted, education is the most powerful weapon, reminding us that learning fuels real change. Signal phrases. your invitation to the quote. A signal phrase introduces a quotation and connects it to your own idea. It includes the author's name and often a verb that shows how they're communicating. Argues, explains, claims, suggests, warns, etc. Common types of signal phrases. We've got basic ones. According to Smith. Analytical. Jones argues that. Descriptive. The article describes how. And then comparative. While Miller disagrees, Johnson claims that. The pro tip: avoid repeating says over and over. Vary your verbs. We have argues, asserts, claims, notes, illustrates, reveals, demonstrates, explains, emphasizes. I didn't see that a lot in this class, people just saying says over and over again, but that is something that I have seen over the years, that you take a quote and you says this person says this, or you just says all the time, and we're just trying to vary our writing, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can say somebody argued a point. So that's the only thing we're trying to say there. Blending quotations into your sentences. To blend smoothly, make sure your quote fits grammatically within your sentence. Here are 3 methods. Method 1, full sentence with a colon. Use this when the quote illustrates or expands on your statement. Orwell's warning about government control remains relevant today. Big Brother is watching you. Method 2, signal phrase with a comma. When the quote is a direct continuation of your signal phrase, Martin Luther King Jr. stated, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Method 3, seamless integration. When the quote naturally fits into your own sentence structure. King reminds readers that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, emphasizing our shared responsibility. Avoid the dropped quote. A dropped quote stands alone without introduction or explanation. For example, incorrect, Big Brother is watching you, Orwell was right. Corrected, Orwell warned readers, Big Brother is watching you, a warning that still resonates today. I also want to point out here, and I know I've said this before, but if you're using a quote, the standard rule is for every line of a quote you use, you should have 2 lines of your own explanation for that quote. That's one of the rules. The second rule that I think is really important here is that if you use over 4 lines of a quote, if you look down at your paper and if you have 4 lines of a quote, you're supposed to then go back to what I was talking about, where you use a full sentence with a colon. You essentially you introduce your quote, you put a colon, and then you have the 4-line quote, and you single space that quote, okay? So that's going to be single spaced. The rest of your paper is double spaced. The long quote is going to be single spaced. And then essentially you hang it underneath of your original paragraph, which means you hit the tab button twice. So typically you hit tab at the beginning of a paragraph, okay? And that indents the paragraph. So this quote, you're going to hit tab, and then you're going to hit tab again, and it's going to flush. The whole thing is going to be indented. Not just the top line, but the whole paragraph will be indented. So it's single spaced and indented underneath where you start your paragraph. And then you'll have this 4-line quote that's now smaller to not take up as much room. And then after you use the quote, you go back to regular paragraph and you just continue writing about the quote. So that's just a really long rule. And I've been telling students, and I don't know if this is the best advice or not, but typically just try to avoid quotes that are that long would be my rule there. You can break them up. Even there's no rule that says you can't talk about the same quote a couple times in a paragraph. So you might be better off just hey, I'm going to use line 1 here. Talk about line 1 for a few sentences. Use line 2. Talk about line 2 for a few sentences, right? In that way, you're not having to follow these strange formatting rules that may or may not affect you all the time, right? And that's not to say that you can't do that. I've done that many times in the past, but again, you might find people that are more strict than me, and they're going to be requiring that, right? They're going to want to see that you're using the single space quote rules effectively. Now we're talking about using ellipses and brackets. Sometimes you need to edit a quotation so it fits your writing. That's fine as long as you do it transparently. One of the things we can do is use the ellipses, the 3 dots. Use them to show that words were removed from the original quote. The original quote. The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable. Revised. The truth will make you miserable. I'm sure that you've seen this happen before, right? Where you see the dots in a quote, and that just means they've cut out a piece of the quote that was not applicable to what they're talking about, or they didn't need the whole quote. And again, if you're using really long quotes, this could be something that you do to like use one sentence of a quote, use the get rid of the 2 lines you don't need, and then have sentence 4 as well. Okay, so that way that you can really cut out the information that you don't think is relevant to what you're talking about. Again, it's really important because you want to have the most relevant information, right? You don't want to have a lot of stuff that is not relevant to what you're talking about. You can also use brackets. You use them to add or change words for clarity or grammar without altering meaning. Original, they are the reason I care. Revised, the author admits, brackets, her students are the reason, brackets, she cares. Have you ever read any interviews with this? That's what I find, a lot of the times when you see brackets used this way, it's during an interview when you've interviewed somebody and that person probably tape recorded that interview and got the whole thing, but what we've talked about in this class, maybe the person that they were interviewing used vague words or pronouns when they were talking about things. So the person writing the interview for an article used the brackets so that they can explain what that person is talking about, right? We're going to get rid of the pronoun and we're just going to talk about the actual noun, right? Because that's what people want when they're reading an article, right? They don't want to have to guess who people are talking about. So I find you're going to see that a lot in interviews. If you ever use an interview, or we're going to actually talk about conducting field research a little bit later today. But that's one thing that you can do if the person you're talking to has information that you want to explain a little bit better. You can use brackets. 5, explaining the quote sandwich. A well-integrated quote follows the 3-part structure: the top bun, the introduction, the quote with context or a signal phrase, the meat, present the quote itself, in the bottom bun, explain or analyze how it supports your argument. For example, in To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus explains why empathy matters. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. Here, Atticus teaches Scout and the reader that moral understanding requires compassion. Without your explanation, the quote is just evidence with no argument. How can poorly integrated quotes weaken your argument? All right, synthesizing sources, letting the experts talk to each other. Introduction, the example. Technology helps students learn, Smith 2021. Technology distracts students from learning, Patel 2020. If both of these statements are true, how could we write about them together? That's what synthesis does. It takes multiple perspectives and puts them in conversation, instead of summarizing one source at a time. Defining the concept. Summarizing means repeating what one source says. For example, Smith 2021 says technology helps students learn. That's one voice at a time. Synthesizing means connecting multiple voices to show relationship or contrast. For example, Smith 2021 argues that technology helps students learn, while Patel 2020 warns that it can also distract students. Together, these perspectives suggest that technology's impact depends on how it's used. Synthesis is where your own voice enters the conversation. You're no longer reporting what others said. You're interpreting and making connections. 3. Why synthesis matters. Synthesis shows how critical thinking, the ability to 1. Recognize patterns and contrast between sources. 2. Evaluate how ideas fit together. And 3. Present a balanced argument. If summarizing is like taking notes from one speaker, synthesizing is like moderating a panel discussion, listening to everyone and guiding the conversation. This skill is essential for research essays because strong arguments come from combining multiple credible voices, not just repeating one. How to synthesize effectively. Step 1. Identify connections between sources. Ask yourself, do these authors agree or disagree? Are they talking about the same issue in different ways? Does one build on the other? Step 2. Use transitions to show relationships. To connect ideas clearly, use transitions such as for agreement, similarly, in addition, both authors suggest. For contrast, however, in contrast, while one argues, and for combination, together, taken collectively, when combined. These perspectives show. And then add your own insight. Your final line should show your own takeaway. For example, together these perspectives reveal that technology's effectiveness in learning depends more on balance and intention than on the tools themselves. The example paragraph. Smith 2021 argues that digital tools make learning more accessible, especially for students who face physical or economic barriers. However, Patel 2020 warns that technology can weaken attention spans if students multitask or rely too heavily on screens. Similarly, Johnson 2019 notes that teachers who balance out online and offline activities see the strongest academic results. Together, these perspectives reveal that technology's impact depends not on the tools themselves, but on how thoughtfully they're used in the classroom. Notice how each author's idea connects to the next with transitions, and the final sentence shows the writer's own conclusion. The paragraph flows like a conversation, not like a list of separate summaries. In summary, summarizing, one voice at a time, synthesizing, multiple voices in conversation. Use transitions to clarify relationships, and end with your own interpretation or conclusion. The more confidently you connect your sources, the more persuasive and credible your writing becomes. You're not just citing experts, you're joining their conversation. Now, I only want to talk about this small part of 7B. Everyone's an author, chapter 22. Finding sources online and at the library. Today, we're discussing chapter 22, which covers essential strategies for finding and evaluating sources, both online and at the library. Understanding how to locate reliable sources is crucial for any research project, whether you're looking for background information or specialized scholarly work. You can start with casual sources, Wikipedia, YouTube, and social media. Casual sources like Wikipedia, YouTube, and social media platforms can be excellent starting points for research. They provide general overviews and can help spark ideas for deeper investigation. Read defensively. Whenever you use sources from the internet, it's vital to read defensively. Verify information from these sources by checking for credibility and cross-referencing with more reliable sources. Determining the type of sources you need. The sources you seek depend on your purpose, audience, and assignment requirements. Consider distinctions such as primary versus secondary sources, scholarly versus popular sources, and older versus more current sources. Primary versus secondary sources. Primary sources are original materials or first-hand accounts, such as interviews, field research, or historical documents. While secondary sources, these interpret or analyze primary sources, providing background context and a broader perspective on a topic. Examples include scholarly books, journals, articles, and annotated bibliographies. Scholarly versus popular sources. Scholarly sources. Articles, books, and papers written by experts, often peer-reviewed and published for a knowledgeable audience. These sources delve deeply into a topic, include citations, and are reviewed by other experts before publication. Popular sources. Written for a general audience, these include newspapers, magazines, and websites. Although often fact-checked, they are not peer-reviewed and tend to provide more general information. Determining if a source is scholarly. Always look at the author's credentials. Check the author's qualifications. The publisher or sponsor. Look for academic presses or reputable organizations. Check out the URL. Trustworthy domains like .edu, education, and .gov government. Research content. Scholarly sources present original research or interpret cited research. Documentation. Look for a bibliography or works cited. Tone and appearance. Scholarly texts use formal language and tend to include tables, charts, and minimal ads, unlike popular sources, which often have colorful images and advertisements. Be vigilant. Some sources may appear scholarly, but aren't credible. Predatory journals, for example, can look legitimate but publish without proper review. Choosing between older and more current sources. For certain disciplines like science and technology, current sources are usually preferred because of rapid developments. I've been using AI as an example a lot for this. If you want to write a paper about AI, you probably need sources that are within 3 to 5 months, right? Because that is developing so quickly. In fields like history or literature, older sources can provide valuable perspectives and are often foundational to the topic. Books in history don't often change, right? Types of sources and where to find them. 1. Reference works. General encyclopedias, dictionaries, and atlases are great for background information. Libraries often offer both print and online versions. Wikipedia and other free online encyclopedias can be starting points, but should be verified with more authoritative sources. Specialized encyclopedias and wikis. These are tailored to specific topics and offer more depth. Be sure to evaluate these for accuracy and credibility. Bibliographies. Often found at the end of books or articles, bibliographies provide lists of related publications, helping you locate additional relevant sources. Books, a staple for in-depth research. Periodicals. Newspapers, magazines, and journals can be found online or in print through library subscriptions. Journal articles, accessed through academic databases like Google Scholar for peer-reviewed articles. Then magazines and news articles. Many are accessible online but may require subscriptions for full access. Then we have government and legal documents. Federal, state, and local government sites offer free access to legislative records, maps, census data, and more. Primary and historical documents. University libraries often house unique collections, including historical documents and oral histories. Use search engines effectively. Keyword searching. Try different keywords and phrases to broaden or narrow your search. Quotation marks. Use quotation marks around phrases to find exact matches. Then Boolean operators, and, or, and not. Enhance searches by combining keywords, example, global warming and industrialization. By using these search techniques, you can find specific and relevant information efficiently. In conclusion, effective research requires an understanding of where to find credible sources and how to evaluate them. By distinguishing between types of sources and knowing where to search, you'll be better equipped to gather information that supports your arguments and adds depth to your research. Remember to evaluate sources carefully, especially those that seem scholarly, to avoid relying on unreliable information. How to write more about any topic. Expanding ideas with purpose, detail, and depth. The introduction. Why writers struggle to write more. Writers often find it easy to start an essay, but difficult to continue developing ideas once the basics are on the page. This usually happens not because there's nothing left to say, but because the topic hasn't been explored deeply enough. Effective writing doesn't come from stretching ideas, it comes from digging deeper into them. The goal is not to write more words, the goal is to write more meaning. For example, a weak version. School uniforms are bad. A stronger version. While school uniforms can create equality, they can also suppress individuality and creativity, especially for students who use fashion as a form of self-expression. The stronger version doesn't just say more, it thinks more. From quantity to depth. Writing more does not mean adding filler or repetition, stretching sentences for length, or restating the same idea in different ways. Writing more means explaining why something matters, providing examples or evidence, and connecting one idea to a larger theme. When a writer can answer why and so what after each statement paragraph, they expand naturally with substance. Strategies for expanding writing. Ask and answer why. Each time a claim is made, follow it with the question why or how so. For example, recycling helps the planet. Why? Because it reduces waste and conserves resources. How? By limiting the amount of trash sent to landfills and cutting down on new production. Each answer becomes a new supporting sentence that develops the idea further. 2. Use specific examples. Examples make writing concrete and vivid. Example, online learning can be stressful. Students may face unreliable internet, distractions at home, or difficulty staying motivated without in-person structure. Specific details, names, actions, and circumstances add both depth and clarity. Explain the evidence. After including a quote, statistic, or fact, explanation is essential. Ask, what does this prove or why is this important? Example, NASA 2023 was the hottest year on record. This shows how climate change is not a distant issue. It's happening right now, affecting weather patterns and ecosystems worldwide. Explanation transforms information into insight. Connect ideas to the bigger picture. Writing becomes stronger when ideas are related to broader themes, contexts, or consequences. For example, social media affects self-esteem. This connects to how society defines worth through the likes and follows, turning validation into a form of currency. Connecting ideas to larger issue builds depth and coherence. Build layers. A well-developed paragraph can be built in layers. You have the main point, the topic sentence, the evidence or example, something to support it, explanation, what that evidence means, connection, why it matters or how it links to the next idea. This structure prevents repetition and gives paragraphs a natural rhythm of development. I would argue that every paragraph can be built this way, right? That's why I always tell you guys, you have the main point, the topic sentence. This is what I'm about to talk about. Then you could have the evidence or example. That's what I'm saying. Then you can introduce a quote, right? So you can use a quote for your argumentative essay. Using quotes is an easy way to do this, right? Here's the evidence. Here's the quote that is evidence. And then you explain what that evidence means. And you could have a couple sentences that then explain what that means and then connect it to the next idea, right? Then you need a transition sentence that's like, we're talking about this because this next thing connects here, right? This structure prevents repetition and gives paragraph a natural rhythm of development. Add, compare, or contrast. Exploring differences or similarities between ideas helps to expand thinking. For example, while traditional classrooms offer structure, online classes provide flexibility and independence. Comparisons show critical thinking and create opportunities for expansion. Include personal insight when appropriate. Reflection adds authenticity and shows awareness of perspective. For example, as someone who's experienced both online and in-person classes, success seems to depend more on time management than format. Personal observation can make analysis more meaningful and relatable. Common pitfalls to avoid. Fake growth in writing often looks long but says little. Avoid. Repeating the same point with different wording. Using vague phrases like things, stuff, or a lot of. Beginning with empty statements such as, since the beginning of time, and adding irrelevant details. Each new sentence should contribute to a new idea, detail, or connection. The practice method, the add 3 more technique. Start with one simple statement and expand it using 3 follow-up sentences. 1, add a reason. 2, add an example. 3, add an explanation of why it matters. For example, video games can improve problem-solving skills. They often require players to analyze patterns, plan ahead, and adapt to changing challenges. For example, puzzle and strategy games push players to think creatively under pressure. These skills transfer to real-life decision-making, especially in teamwork or problem-based learning situations. This approach develops a full, thoughtful paragraph from a single idea. The quick reference, ways to expand ideas. Explain why. The key question, why does it matter? The example, recycling reduces landfill waste. The strategy, give an example. What does this look like in practice? The example, for example, schools that. Strategy, explain the evidence. The key question, what does this prove? Strategy, connect to bigger ideas. Key question, how does this relate to society or life? Strategy, add contrast. The key question, how is this different from another idea? Closing reflection, good writing isn't about saying more, it's about seeing more. When a writer looks closer, asks deeper questions, and connects ideas thoughtfully, the length of the essay grows naturally. The goal is not to fill pages, but to fully explore the topic until the idea feels complete.